Welcome! My name is Tina Christensen, and in today's video, we will be discussing the effect of looping used in Philip Glass's Opening and how it introduces the entirety of Glassworks. Although Glassworks can seem to be a minimal and simple piece of music, it is much more complex than it seems. This video will go into detail on Opening, which is the first movement of Glassworks, and then explain how the looping effect is used in Opening and how it's incorporated throughout the entirety of Glassworks. However, before we dig into that, we need to first understand minimalist music, who Philip Glass is, and what Glassworks is. As stated by Otto Caroli, the term minimalism first appeared in the 1960s. This term was first incorporated in the visual arts by reducing materials, structure, and color to their most minimal elements. Here is an example of minimalist artwork. According to the Ashgate Research Companion to Minimalist and Post-Minimalist Music, minimalism was an incipient product of the late 1950s or early 1960s. During this time in the musical world, atonal music was at its golden age. However, when a German record label by the name of Deutsche Grammophon released a 3-record set of music by an unknown composer, who was Steve Reich, who is also a minimalist composer, a huge impact was made for minimalist music. This is because the record label was most known for its releases of classical and atonal music. So, when classical music record store borrowers went from listening to this then this, this music definitely caught their attention. Philip Glass, along with Lamonte Young, Terry Riley, and Steve Reich, helped develop minimalist music in America. Philip Glass is an American composer from Baltimore, Maryland, who attended the University of Chicago and Juilliard to study composition. After Glass's studies at Chicago and Juilliard, he went to Paris and studied with Nadia Boulanger, a French teacher, conductor, organist, and composer. During these 2 years in Paris, Glass actually composed very little, but reformed a lot of his musical technique. His studies with Boulanger are what influenced his minimalist works throughout his life. To quote Glass himself, I would describe it this way: if you wanted to be a carpenter, you would learn how to use a hammer and a saw and how to measure. That would be basic. If someone said, "Here, build a table," but you had never done it before, you would pick up the tools and maybe you could build a table, but it would be shaky and probably a mess. What Nadia Boulanger taught us was how to hold a hammer, how to use a saw, how to measure, how to visualize what you were doing, and how to plan the whole process. Without the refining of his technique here, Glass would have never developed his minimalistic style. Here are some examples of Glass's most famous works. Something else that Glass is most known for is his film and television scores. He has won multiple awards, such as a Golden Globe for his movie score to The Truman Show, and inspired rising minimalist composers such as John Adams. Now that we know what minimalist music is and who Philip Glass is, let's get into Glass's work, Glassworks. Glassworks, which was released in 1982, is a work for 2 flutes, 2 soprano saxophones, 2 tenor saxophones, 2 French horns, viola, cello, piano, and DX7 synthesizer. To quote Glass himself, a 6-movement work, Glassworks was intended to introduce my music to a more general audience than had been familiar with it up to then. The 6 movements titled Opening, Flow, Islands, Rubric, Facades, and Closing are all unique, yet very similar to each other and have a different effect on every listener. Specifically, the first movement, opening, sets up Glass's compositional choices for listeners to understand the looping effect used in the entirety of Glassworks. In opening, which is written for piano, Glass creates loops through harmonic and rhythmic structure, which gives the effect to the listener that there is almost no perception of time. For the purpose of this video, a loop is defined as a series of segments. For example, in opening, this is segment 1 from loop 1. Although the music to segment 1 is only written out once, since there is a repeat here, when it repeats, it makes a new segment, which is also known as segment 2. The rest of the segments from loop 1 are here, and here is all of loop 1. The segments combined are what make it a complete loop. As for the rest of opening, when listening to it, a series of loops can be heard. As scholar Chia-Ying Wu has noted, Glass constructed opening as a series of 4 small loops, each of which contain 3 segments with loop breakers that connect one loop to the other. So let's take a look at that. Like I just said, the loop breakers help the loops meld from one to the other. So here is an example of that from the end of loop 1. And the loop breaker, which leads into loop 2. What gives opening a great forward momentum and what make it incredibly intriguing. The difference between the loop breakers and the loops themselves are how long they are and how sudden they change. As each loop breaker happens, they develop within opening, making it even more intriguing. Here are the other locations of the loops and their segments. As we have already gone over, loop 1 and its loop breaker are located at the beginning of the piece. Loop 2, its segments and breaker are here. Loop 3, its segments and breaker are here. And loop 4s are here. Looking at the score, we see the 4 small loops here, but Glass adds a da capo twice, meaning to repeat once or play a total of 2 times, which then makes the entirety of opening one large loop. At the last measure of the second time, we see an add French horn 2 last time notation which melds opening to flow, which is the second movement of Glassworks. The segments and loops that occur within opening are one way that Glass sets the listener up for looping used in the other movements in Glassworks. The forward momentum that I just discovered in the loop breakers of opening is enhanced by the piece's tonal ambiguity, which an analysis of the chord progressions will show. The way these loops are set up harmonically are another way that drives the piece forward. In music, a chord progression is a succession of chords which establishes the tonality of a piece. For example, here is a common chord progression used in music in the key of C major. Instead of looking at the score as it's written, here is a look at what the chords are when the music is blocked. So, while looking at the loop 1 chords from opening, I will play these measures blocked instead of as written. The chords for the first 2 segments in the first loop in opening progress from F minor to E flat major, and then either to D major flat 7, which is in the first ending, or C minor, which is in the second ending. Fusing the two segments together flawlessly is the repeat with the first and second endings. Like a never-ending stream, the progressions and loops flow together and give listeners a sense of curiosity and uncertainty as to what will come next. After all of the repetitive chord progressions, Glass surprises listeners once again with a seamless transition into the second movement, flow, as stated earlier. The harmonic looping found in opening is another way that Glass sets up his looping effect, which is used throughout Glassworks. Although opening may sound like there's not really a time signature, the written time signature, meter, and tempo are what tie together the looping effect. Opening is written for one piano. However, when I first heard it, it sounded like there were multiple pianos playing together. This effect happens because of Glass's multimeter writing. Marked at 96 beats per minute, the right hand plays triplets, while the left hand plays eighth notes and whole notes. Taken from a different loop, so we don't hear loop 1 a million times before the end of this video, here is what the right hand and the left hand sound like separately with this loop. When put together, this writing is what makes the music sound like a presto 12/8 against a moderato 4/4. The choice to go slower and to add phrasing causes the work to have a different effect on the listener. Here is what the work would sound like interpreted differently than what is notated in the score. With opening played at a slower tempo, the piece's effect is drawn out and longing, rather than intimate with a forward momentum. Up to speed, because of the different note lengths and harmonies, certain notes can feel attached to some, while others have a more forward momentum. With this compositional choice, on top of the harmonic analysis of the looping, the segments and loops blend together seamlessly, playing with the listener's perception of time. You might be asking yourself, how exactly does Glass play with the listener's perception of time? First, it's important to know what exactly time is. I did some research and discovered in this article that there is actually a complex relation between minimalist musical works and the metaphysics of time. To quote Nemesio Garcia Corral Puy, in the metaphysics of time, two alternative conceptions of time can be broadly distinguished: the dynamic and static views. The dynamic view of time implies a movement of time from the past to the present to the future, where decisions made in the present can affect the future. This is what we normally view time as. However, the static view of time is where things get a little tricky. A great way to imagine the static view of time is to think of time as a reel of film. The reel of film just flows, and no matter what you do in your present, there is no effect on your future. This is where minimalist music and the static view of time have similarities. Puy states that minimalist musical works possess the features of no distinctive present, no objective direction, and no objective flow in the virtue of their nature or configuration. This is exactly how Glassworks is written. Each movement just flows into the next one, but with no objective or endpoint. It just goes. Taken from this book, Aaron Schatzman asks the question, has Glass attempted to create music which aims to induce a thoughtful, perhaps meditative state of mind in the listener, music whose specific purpose is to stimulate contemplation of reflections, and which encourages such responses by adding a supportive or suggestive sonic element to one's environment? It is unclear what Glass's actual intention is. However, after diving into the complex relation between the metaphysics of time and minimalist music, static time can cause listeners to think more in the moment, which causes the thoughtful, meditative state of mind. At the beginning of this video, I introduced my thesis to you, which was that Glass's compositional choices used in opening set up listeners for the looping effect, which is used in the entirety of Glassworks. These compositional choices include the form and analysis of Glass's loops, the harmonic structure of the loops, and how Glass plays with the listener's perception of time. As a conductor myself, I believe it's very important to get as close to the music as possible before actually analyzing the music itself, which is why I briefly went over minimalist music and who Philip Glass is. Now that we've gone over all of these elements, it is important to keep in mind that listening to Glass's music is much more rewarding when knowing how to listen to it. Listening to Glass requires the same attitude as listening to any other music. Patience, an open mind, and a willingness to be surprised all help. After that, there are two honest ways. One is just to listen and accept it at a face value. It is the way most people listen to most music, and it is also the best. If you want understanding, it will come in good time. But sometimes the music does not let you do that. It makes you react in a puzzled or irritated way, and it makes you start to ask questions. This is a feature of the listener, not the music, and it makes the second way necessary. Essentially, you have to free your mind of the obstacles that are causing the reaction.